Well, hello everybody. How's it going? Happy Wednesday. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And we are one day away from the day where we get away with eating a lot of food. And that's Thanksgiving. Very much looking forward to that. And let me know down in the comments below what you guys eat on Thanksgiving. I've heard a lot of comments about how people hate sweet potato casserole. That surprises me a lot. And also green bean casserole. Why do people hate green bean casserole? I don't know. I just don't get it. But maybe I'm just weird. At the same time, I also don't like yams and olives and all that crap. But let me know in the comments below. What's your most favorite Thanksgiving dish and your least favorite Thanksgiving dish? And as we get into this video too, and before we do, I just want to also wish you guys a happy and healthy Thanksgiving. I look forward to myself spending time with friends and family, and I hope you do the same. And for those that will be working on Thanksgiving, I'm talking about our truckers out there. We also wish you a happy Thanksgiving as well. Hopefully you get home as soon as you can and you have an opportunity to spend time with friends and family as well. With that being said, guys, we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the short-term weather pattern for Thanksgiving and into this weekend. And we could be seeing another winter system, this time for the Midwest. I don't know. We'll talk about it. But first, let's just kind of go over what's happening here in the lower 48. This is, of course, using the College of DuPage radar, which you guys also have access to. It's down in the description below. We do have quite a bit of rainfall activity across Connecticut and Massachusetts. We did see some snowfall earlier on this morning and into last night for places like New Hampshire, Vermont. That still continues today. But we did see some snowfall in places like western Massachusetts and even down towards some portions of Connecticut. Not much. We saw about current observations about 1 to 2 inches of snowfall. Keep in mind our ground temperatures are still relatively above freezing, so not all of that stuck. But we did see some snowfall in some of these parts. But right now, the main event, though, is really for those folks in Maine that are seeing the snowfall as we speak at the time of this video, from Bangor all the way through Caribou. And that's expected to continue for the next few to several hours. So if you are going to be traveling on either, Thanksgiving or tonight, be cautious that you could run into some slick spots the farther north you go. Places like Connecticut, Long Island, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, they all saw rain. Not too concerned about that. And also, we're not expecting any of that to freeze over. Temperatures are going to stay relatively above freezing through Thanksgiving and into Friday. So really, if you're going to be traveling up the I-95 corridor, all throughout New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, even up towards New York City, not too concerned about you guys. As a matter of fact, all that rainfall that we saw last night and into this morning has now moved offshore in association with that cold front. Where showers and storms still are lingering this morning is along coastal Carolina, both North and South Carolina, seeing some heavier precipitation. Let's go ahead and actually zoom into that here. This is the same system, by the way, that brought severe weather to portions of Alabama, Mississippi, even back towards Louisiana. We'll talk about the latest on those surveys because we actually do have new information about the tornadoes that touched down just a couple days ago. More on that later in the video. But at least as of this morning, some convective bands we see moving along the coast, especially to the east of Raleigh-Durham. Expect some heavier precipitation. Same interstate corridor applies to the I-95 corridor. So if you're going to be traveling up there, this is all going to be frontal precipitation. So if you were to demarcate your cold front, it's pretty much right in this vicinity where I drew that pink line. And I kind of noticed that it's also the same color as the other line I drew. So let me actually redraw that in blue just to kind of highlight that better. So this is really going to be our cold front, right? And all this convection is frontal. We should expect this to linger over the next few hours, but eventually, by the time we get to Thanksgiving morning, all of this should clear out. Should see some cooler temperatures, but not anything too extreme. Again, we're not going to be talking about a huge Arctic plunge that moves through the East Coast behind this cold front. As a matter of fact, our polar jet stream is lagging behind pretty significantly to where we're not going to see much of that Arctic air until the weekend. The good news is, not going to be dealing with many hazards in the East Coast. A lot of this weather that we've seen, both with the snow as well as the rain, that's going to really clear out by the time we get to Thanksgiving. Just keep in mind, travel could be affected if you're going to be heading up here to the far northern reaches of New England, at least in the short term. And for the rest of the country, really, I don't want to use the term nothing to talk about. There really is nothing much going on. Now, that's not to say that there isn't some sort of storyline happening here. We do have some drought conditions lingering out towards the central United States, and the extreme to exceptional drought continues for areas of the Gulf Coast. We're going to get a new drought monitor update later on this week from the U.S. Drought Monitor. It's going to give us an update on the drought conditions down there. We have seen more of a frequency of rainfall in these regions, so it's going to be interesting to see if we've seen some sort of improvement in the drought that's been plaguing a lot of this region over the last several weeks to a couple of months. But for the short term, not expecting much activity. Should be a pretty quiet Thanksgiving, very dry conditions for the most part. And let's take a look at our temperatures as well, at least as of this morning. Let's go ahead and put on some station plots here. And, it is relatively chilly for you folks down here in the Gulf. I mean, we're seeing current lows in the 40s and mid-40s. Expect those temperatures to warm up into the 50s and maybe touch 60 by the time we get to this afternoon and even Thanksgiving. You're going to see the polar jet concept a little while in this video where we talk about, and I sort of show you why that cold air is lagging behind and where it is. Because, for us, we would expect to see that cold air rush in behind a big cold front like the one we see along the East Coast. But that's not the case this time around. More on that later. And also, programming note, I will be putting chapters in my videos going forward. I think that's a lot easier for you guys to navigate through. So I will divvy this up based on what we talked about. So this is sort of our big picture to kind of set the scene for what's happening here, at least in the immediate short term. And then finally, for our folks in the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest, a little bit more of a dicier situation, right? I mean, if you were just looking at this map and this radar, you would think that we're not seeing a lot of activity here. Yeah, you got maybe some elevated snow showers up towards northern Idaho. Yeah, you got some showers lingering behind, in Oregon and even Montana, but you wouldn't think much of it. Well, we're actually expected to see a winter storm on Thanksgiving for some of the folks along the I-80 corridor in Idaho, Wyoming. This is really going to affect not just travelers, but also truckers. There's a lot of truckers on that Interstate 80 route. We're going to talk about that here during today's video as well. So overall, for much of the country, not expecting a lot of impacts. Ironically, the most impacts are going to be in areas that are areas that people are not really traveling to on Thanksgiving, which is like Cheyenne, Wyoming, portions of Wyoming as well as Idaho. Again, we'll talk about that more later on. And as I said, I'll divvy up this video and sort of divide it up on sort of what we talk about. As we get into the forecast for the Rockies, really, and show you guys a general forecast for that, because that's really the only significant system that's going to be taking place during Thanksgiving, I did want to deviate for a second and just give you guys an update on the latest from Monday's tornadoes. So we had 14 tornado reports. And look, there was a lot of questions from the weather community about whether this forecast verified. Let's not forget that we had an enhanced 10 sig right in this vicinity in central Louisiana and then extending into west central Mississippi. The 10% verified. Did the sig verify? Well, the sig category is for any tornadoes that form EF2 or greater. And at least based on the current surveys we've had from the NWS thus far, the only ones we've seen is an EF1. So we had an EF1 near Nacogdoches, 105 miles per hour touching extreme southern Nacogdoches Parish, Doppler radar indicated, and this is another storm survey, EF1 for Madison, Mississippi. So a lot of EF1s. I have yet to see a SIGTOR. But here's the thing, guys. This is such a vulnerable area. I talked about this during Monday's live stream. I mean, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, even some parts of eastern Texas and Arkansas, these are areas where you have a lot of poor people. You have people that live in trailer parks. You have folks that live in heavily forested areas. And not only that, but, that pretty much covers it, right? And they're also, access to media, even in some cases, is rather limited. So they're an incredibly vulnerable bunch down there. And the setup that we were talking about on Monday was a low-level jet, which actually causes veering with height, the turning of the winds we look for tornado development, actually strengthening through the nighttime. That's what we call a nocturnal low-level jet. And it was very concerning to us forecasters because we know this is an area that's incredibly vulnerable. Tornadoes are already lethal at night. We tend to sleep through them. And not only that, but these are areas that are vulnerable on top of being nighttime, tornado threat. So this could have been a lot worse than what was forecasted. And I'm certainly not one of those that, yes, there are times where the Storm Prediction Center forecasts verify and they don't. As a matter of fact, they're very transparent about that. They post all of their, forecast verifications publicly. They're going to be wrong, right? And technically, were they wrong? Yes, but they still nailed down the 10% pretty damn good, right, over Louisiana and Mississippi. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a bust. I mean, technically it is, but it's still verified in some respect. And also, the great news is no deaths, no injuries. For a late season system like this, I mean, I always hold my breath. Not only do you have people that live in vulnerable communities down here, you also add a crap ton of chaser conversions, aka people that are coming from all over the country to go chase one particular point. That is also very dangerous, and it's not really the ideal place to chase down there. There are some spots that are good, but for the most part, it's really, really quite forested, and you do get some rolling hills. The topography there is really not chaser-friendly at all. So, a great outcome, at least in my opinion. Again, 13 tornado reports as of today, most of them being EF1. We've yet to see one that's been rated a SIG, but of course we can always go back to that if I see anything significant change on that front. The other thing is, I guess what I wanted to show will really dive into the Wyoming winter system. So let's actually start by taking a look at the current hazards here. Like we talked about at the top of the conversation, we have winter weather advisories. Winter weather advisories littered across northern New England. No winter weather advisories or warnings any place south in that, but we are expected to continue to see snowfall in these areas over the next few to several hours. Meanwhile, our system of concern for Thanksgiving, a Thanksgiving snowstorm, is going to be for our folks out in the northern Rockies, Wyoming in particular, as well as extended back into North Platte, Nebraska, and even some counties in southern Montana, where we could see some significant snowfall. And again, this is a winter storm watch by Riverton, Wyoming, but they are forecasting for anywhere between 10 to 16 inches of snow. In this case, it's 6 to 12, a little bit more south. But as you go north, into the northern portions of Wyoming, where you get more of that westerly flow, we're expected to see snowfall anywhere between 10 to 16 inches. So this would be from 5 a.m. Thanksgiving through Friday morning. So please be careful. Anywhere you're driving through Wyoming, particularly the Interstate 80 corridor, you definitely want to be mindful of these conditions, because it certainly will bring about some snowfall for a lot of you in Wyoming and for those that will be traveling. Let's actually take a look at some of the models here on this system, and we'll actually dive into a sounding on sort of what this looks like, and we'll actually dissect this, because this is really cool to look at. And I know there's a lot of information on here. Some of it might be a little bit more redundant, but we'll dissect this here in just a moment. Let me first show you at least what the model output is, and we'll look here at the HRRR, and we'll get a little bit closer to our region of concern, which is going to be the northern Rockies. So there we go. And we'll also put up our precipitation here, composite reflectivity type. Okay, so this takes us into Wednesday morning, right? Now, I'm going to preface this. This might seem like it pops out of nowhere, the snowfall. Welcome to mountain meteorology, but I'm actually going to show you how we go from like 0 to 100 real quick, okay? So this takes us into basically right now, Wednesday morning, but as we get into the afternoon and then eventually the evening hours, you do start to see this snowfall banding really begin to ramp up. There is a reason for it, and as we get to Wednesday morning, look at that, a lot of heavy snowfall early on for Thanksgiving morning, and that lingers on at least for a few hours by the time we get to Friday. So let me show you why, because you're probably wondering, like, that just looks kind of weird. I mean, we're not seeing a bowling ball trough. We're not seeing, like, really maybe a lot on TV, unless if you live in these areas. But there's a reason why. So let's take a look at that now. We'll actually head on over to the GFS, and we'll look at the 500 millibar wind speed. And let's actually zoom out a little bit more just so you guys can see it here. There we go. Okay, so here's the deal. You got westerly, actually, you know what? I'm going to zoom in more. I lied, because that might be kind of hard to see. So let's do maybe the northwest. Yeah, okay, cool. So we kind of have this split flow going on in the Pacific. So here's your polar jet, as well as here's your sort of your Pacific jet, right? Or just really split flow, you can think about it. And look at our winds in the mid-levels. So these little arrows are demarcating the wind direction at this height level, which is our jet stream, right? So 500 millibar wind speed is really our jet stream that you always see on TV that we're constantly referencing. So we got westerly flow, right? And, for the most part, it's somewhat northwest. Well, watch what happens here and keep an eye on the west coast once we get to tonight. You start to see some of that flow move southward. And these little divots, these lines, you actually have some troughing that's interacting with mountains there. And as that flow continues to move south, it's still westerly, right? But now it's encompassing much of Wyoming. So let's go back for a second, right? Our strongest flow is to the north of our focus region, Wyoming and far southern reaches of Montana. But watch as we get into tonight. Now you have still westerly flow, but this time it's shifted over portions of Wyoming. Why is that important? Well, think about it this way. If we're talking about orography and mountains, we're not at a surface level of 1,000 millibars. We're actually elevated. So if we're at higher elevations, then we're really referencing some of our higher height levels. Not necessarily 500 millibars or like 3 to 5 kilometers high, but anywhere even between 1 to 3, right? So in this case, if we're talking about snowfall for 8,000 to 12,000 feet, this is transporting Pacific air over top, right? And that's helping to saturate the air column right where we would see snowflake development. So we would then expect at our higher elevations to see snowfall as long as we have winds that are perpendicular to the windward side of the mountains. Let's actually draw this for a second because I think it's a really kind of a complex thing, so I think it's important to draw it. So say we have westerly flow, which we do, right? So we have westerly flow that's moving over these mountains. Well, if we know anything about orography, and this is a very simplistic drawing, but let's just kind of follow me for a second. Let's say our mountains in Wyoming, all of them uniformly, move windward and then leeward. So here's our windward, and then the other side on the eastern flank is our leeward. Well, if I have westerly flow that's being advected over the mountains, that's going to move upslope of the mountains, condense, and then precipitate. So think of the mountains as sort of a lifting source, right? So they actually do help to essentially create snowfall at the higher elevations, exactly what we're seeing here. This isn't one of those, like, we're not trying to forecast a nor'easter, we're not trying to forecast a big bowling ball low pressure system. That really isn't the case here. Instead, we just kind of have a subtle synoptic feature that just brings about westerly flow, advects it over the mountains, and then produces snow. And then by the time we get to Thursday, that trough then begins to really dig, and then eventually we do lose that westerly flow. So we do expect snowfall to start to taper off in the northern reaches of Wyoming once this trough sags south. So if you're going to be driving through Interstate 80, in particular northern Wyoming and southern Montana, I might have said Manitoba, I do apologize if I did, you want to be careful, all right? Just know that the worst of the snowfall is likely going to begin this evening into the overnight, and then cut off pretty sharply by the time we get to Thursday afternoon, Thanksgiving afternoon. For other areas, central Wyoming, southern Wyoming, that snowfall is going to continue into the afternoon. Still seeing that continuous westerly flow. That trough digs just for a little bit longer, and could see some snow linger into the evening on Thanksgiving. Maybe some flurries hanging around by Friday morning. So that's how we're really getting snowfall with this system. I hope you guys understood that. If you have any questions, though, about anything we talk about in this video, just post those down in the comments below. I'd be happy to touch on that for you. And lastly, let's look at a sounding. And this is going to be for the northern reaches of Wyoming Sheridan County Airport. So I want to show this conceptually too, right? So here's our wind barbs. This is our wind with height. Our surface level here is 1,000, but keep in mind, we're elevated in Sheridan, Wyoming. We're just above the surface. We're got some elevation to factor in. And at least as of what would be this morning, it's pretty darn dry, right? We also have winds in the mid-levels and upper levels that are out of the northwest. We'll keep an eye on those winds and watch what happens, because this is going to correlate exactly with what we talked about. So as we get into later on today, look at our winds. Now we're starting to get a little bit more westerly in the upper levels. And once we turn pure westerly, look at our dew point in green, our temperature in red. They start to get really close together. And there you go, right? So we have turning of the winds, right? Turning of the winds more westerly, which would be favorable for some of those mountains that are essentially, perpendicular to the flow. And then what happens here is we get that wind to strengthen. Once it turns westerly in our favor, then it ramps up, and that helps to saturate our air column. So when we see our dew point or temperature, our profile, our temperature and dew point, when they're on top of each other, our profile is saturated. So when our temperature is below freezing, we would then see snow, so long as this sort of bends into the DGZ, our den of growth zone, which is anywhere between -10 to -20. DGZ just means growth of snowflakes, by the way. I apologize if I'm throwing too much technical jargon out at you on a Wednesday, but that's essentially what it is, right? So as we get into the evening, our temperatures do cool, and then even cold into Thursday morning, and our profile here is right just below freezing. So we could see some pretty heavy wet flakes out of this thing once we get to late tonight into early Thursday morning. Again, this is just Sheridan County Airport, looking at a reference there, and that's going to be in north central Wyoming. So we have a pretty interesting system going on, and like I said, if you're going to be traveling through Wyoming, pretty much anywhere of Wyoming, you want to be mindful of this. The worst time of travel is going to be right at the time where a lot of people are traveling, which is tonight into Thanksgiving. So you want to make sure that you're being cautious about that, especially as you're traveling through different elevation heights. The other discussion, I guess the last point that we have today, is let's just kind of look ahead to what we can expect for the rest of the week into early next week. And look, I have seen some things about a potential winter system that we could be seeing in the Midwest as soon as early next week. Let's actually talk about that here. So we have a upper level ridge that continues for much of the west, with the exception, of course, of the Rockies, that even though you're under the ridge, you are going to be seeing that westerly flow that helps to produce some snowfall. You got a couple of troughs here, one being a cutoff low, the other one a shortwave trough. That's going to continue to move off to the east with time. Could bring additional showers and storms for the Carolinas later on this evening. Most of it should clear out in the afternoon. And then look what happens here. We got a troughing pattern once again. So there's some of that height falls as indicated here by our map. And, by the way, this is also looking at our jet stream too. And look what happens here. Get a little system to move through by the time we get to Sunday. And there's our cold punch. Hey, if you guys were wondering where that cold air is, here it is, right? So, folks in northeast New England, you're going to see that front move through tonight and tomorrow like we talked about. And you're probably going to wonder, where the hell's the cold? It's going to be coming around Friday evening, or I should even say Friday morning into the evening. And then Saturday and Sunday is likely to be some of your colder air. Then our second system, like we talked about, this could be rather interesting, right? That trough moves through northern Illinois, the lower Great Lakes, before a nice little punch of cold air also plunges through the lower Great Lakes following that system. Here's why I'm sort of concerned, right? There isn't anything on the models that is showing a major snowstorm. I want to just preface that right now, okay? I have already seen some crazy news articles out there just posted all over about this system saying that it's going to be a major snowstorm. Okay, I don't understand that. That's just weird. Are we watching it? Yes, and let me tell you why. We have this shortwave trough, which is associated with low pressure, right? And we have some pretty significant height falls here, which leads to instability. This is also digging across the Rockies. There's a concept in meteorology we call lee-side troughing. Lee-side troughing is essentially saying when you have favorable flow that moves over the Rockies, on the lee side of the mountains, you can sometimes get this low pressure that forms. And then that low pressure tends to swing out ahead and just cut right across. These are very pesky systems because it's not something that you can necessarily predict really far in advance. Think about like nor'easters, right? You can really get somewhat of an idea of a major pattern shift that would favor a nor'easter, in some cases 5 to 7 days out. In this case, with some of these smaller scale systems like lead-side troughs in the mountains, you really only get a couple of day lead time before you really start to establish what's going on here. So we could have some form of a little clipper move through, or a lead-side trough move through this region of the country by the time what would be essentially Sunday into Monday. It remains to be seen on how strong this system will be. I'll show you here some of the snowfall maps here in a moment. But when I see troughing like this and then cold air sort of wrapping around behind, that tells me that somebody's going to get snow. I don't, whether that be Northern Illinois or Central Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, that remains to be seen. But let me actually look here at the Euro and see if it's showing something similar. And yes, it is. So we have pretty good, even model confidence just between those two solutions. And also the GEFS was showing it too, that we're going to have this shortwave trough that digs through the Rockies. So I am particularly concerned. I mean, you want to keep an eye on this, guys. Lower Great Lakes region, just keep a heads up. I mean, we could see a short-term low-pressure system that kind of cuts through, could produce a burst of snow. As far as, snowfall and measurable snowfall, let's take a look at it, right? I mean, I'm not really too bullish on it right yet. I am somewhat keeping an eye on it because it is rather concerning. But here it is, right? There's our what would be essentially a lee-side trough that forms. So notice that there's not really much going on except for the Central Rockies, and then it digs, and then it punches right across. GFS is a little bit more on the conservative side, not showing a lot of snow with this thing, but rather a burst that moves through Sunday morning. And that could be kind of a pain in the butt for people traveling about on the weekend and doing some shopping. We'll keep a close eye on this. I mean, this could be a rather interesting system to watch. Lee-side troughs can always be total wild cards when it comes to snowfall. And as far as even the total snowfall accumulations from this system, let's go ahead and take a look at that. This is the NBM, so it's the numerical blend of models. It takes an average of every single solution you could think of under the sun. And let's actually zoom back a little bit earlier. And yeah, so the NBM is showing some snowfall, and even some lake effect snowfall beyond too. That also could be a thing to watch with some of that colder air punching right behind. So I didn't mention it during this video, but lake effect snow could also be a thing because remember, as we just saw, we got cold air wrapping behind it, and so long as we have sort of a northwesterly flow, well, wherever that wind direction sets up, we're going to see probably some significant snowfall for folks in Traverse City and Marquette and the UP. But we'll have to keep a close eye on that here, as well as this system as a whole. So anyway, that concludes today's video. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We will probably not be doing a video tomorrow because it is American Thanksgiving, and I do want to watch some football and eat some food. But we will be back here on Friday. We'll do a Black Friday video. Might even do a special edition Black Friday live stream for you guys as well. So be sure to like, subscribe, share this with family and friends. Hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will see you on the next video.